My name is Philip Ball. I'm a science writer and author. And this is a session that I'm particularly pleased to see included in this conference, because one of the things that I, as a science writer and communicator on science and technology, often struggle with is how advances in technological capabilities as a result of the scientific endeavor are often presented by those engaged with them as exciting and beneficial and liberating, but may be perceived in the wider world as maybe ominous, dehumanizing, dystopian. Both of those views are generally simplistic, and both might be dangerously so. I think that if history teaches us one thing about technological advance, it's that it will change us, but individually and as a society, but often in ways that we don't anticipate. And one, I think, need only look to the history of the motor car or at telecommunications technologies to see the truth of that. I think we sometimes focus perhaps too much on issues of what new technologies let us do that we couldn't do before, and not enough on the social and I'd say the psychic changes that take place underneath all of that. I mean, I don't think, for example, that we've really yet psychically processed the notion that from pretty much every point in the space that we now inhabit, almost all of the world's recorded knowledge is now accessible. That's a very odd thing to suddenly have available. And look, here we are discussing human flourishing by making use of those technologies, thanks to which this discussion can, as Einstein said of imagination, can encircle the world. So this session will focus on how technological advance and innovation, and specifically in artificial intelligence, can propel breakthroughs that enhance human ethical capabilities and improve the human experience rather than hinder it. I think artificial intelligence is particularly resonant from this perspective. First, because it's becoming such a powerful tool for distilling knowledge from data, but also bound up with that and with the way that the phrase itself inserts human attributes into technology, bound up with it are fears about what such a powerful tool might do to our sense of self and autonomy. Now, before I introduce the members of the panel, we're going to see a short video that was made at a workshop in San Francisco that's relevant to the topic of this session. It was called Human Flourishing and the Futures of Intelligence.
In early November, TWCF, Worldview Studio, and the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence co-hosted a workshop at Stanford University on human flourishing and the futures of intelligence. We gathered 40 leaders from academia, business and technology, foundations and nonprofits, and the futurist community. We asked, looking out to 2040, how might artificial and collective intelligence co-evolve with human intelligence to promote or limit human flourishing? We heard from experts tracking developments in AI technology, design, ethics and governance, and how AI is already changing the way we work. We also learned about how AI could transform what we can know about our bodies and our world. Panelists explored how we could use that knowledge to collaborate more effectively and help our communities flourish. After each panel, we worked in small groups to identify credible assumptions and major uncertainties about the future of AI and collective intelligence. A final panel discussion helped us zero in on key themes relating to human intelligence and flourishing that we would build into our stories of the future on day 2. Some of our credible assumptions about the future in 2040 included that we could count on more AI being integrated into our lives, that AI will be used in ways that are unanticipated by their designers, that market forces will drive AI development. We also collectively identified 10 uncertainties that could shape the future, including, will access to AI applications be restricted to elite users or widely available and equitable? Will AI predominantly enhance human labor or substitute for it? Will new intelligence primarily help individuals to exploit opportunities, or will it help align individual actions with collective needs? Will AI development be aligned well or poorly with the goals of human flourishing. Each small group used these uncertainties to create 4 future scenarios, then developed one of those scenarios more deeply to share with all of us. In a scenario called DIY AI, artificial intelligence tools remained narrow in functionality, but became broadly accessible. This resulted in citizen developers, which formed groups to create technological solutions to address their specific needs. Through these highly targeted collaborations, individuals leveraged AI tools to help themselves, and others like them, to better flourish. In a scenario called Megascope Mothership, AI enhanced human labor and meaning, and society became more trusting. Energy breakthroughs unleashed humanity's potential, and the surveillance state became the nurturing state. Human beings flourished in this world through cross-cultural and cross-species connections, giving rise to integrated intelligence, as opposed to artificial intelligence. After we shared our stories of the future, we identified several questions that we wanted to be sure to explore more deeply in a future scenario planning exercise. These included, how can we use AI to help humans better use our own unique superpowers, like empathy, altruism, and cooperation? What will it feel like to live with more ubiquitous AI? How will we hold on to, or even enhance, the joyful human experiences of discovery and creation? And as we face existential risks like climate change, how can we use AI to enable better collective decision-making and interdependent behavior? We cannot predict the future, but we can shape it. The scenario vignettes we created are a first step in a more robust futures exercise that will help us envision what's to come. Now is the time to launch deep, exploratory conversations about what good means in a world with AI, and how new technologies can advance rather than constrain human flourishing. These conversations must span identities, sectors, geographies, and cultures, so we can unleash our collective intelligence and energy in service of humanity and the planet.
So let me now introduce our panelists. Isabela Granic is a researcher, a teacher, a facilitator, and author. She's a scientist and researcher at McMaster University in Canada and is the director of the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab in the Netherlands. She's also Chief Scientific Officer of the Play Nice Institute, an organization that seeks to build and distribute evidence-based games that promote emotional health and well-being for children and young people. Maria Modigh is the co-CEO of 29K, an open-source, co-created, non-profit-making organization that creates psychological tools for mental health, inner development, and civic leadership in a way that is accessible, free, and meaningful to millions. Srinivasan has a background in AI and worked at Yahoo. She is co-founder of, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Srinija, of Loove, a developing music venture that is designed to demonstrate how commerce and technology can be guided by artistic values rather than letting our culture be led by market values. And Srinija serves as the vice chair of Stanford University's Board of Trustees and is a board member of the On Being project. So I want to start by asking each of you to talk about what it is that scientists and technologists are learning about how to design new technologies so that they enhance rather than reduce humanity's innate capacity to flourish. And Isabela, if I could come to you first, I know you've been trying explicitly to do this, to connect the science of emotional well-being to the fundamental design of new technologies. And I gather you have a short video about this work, so I'm going to hand over to you to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Philip. So yeah, in our lab, what we do is we take evidence-based practices that are scientifically proven to help enhance flourishing, and then we build video game engines that take those techniques and sort of translate them into game mechanics. And then we have designers and artists working with us from the very beginning to make sure that these games are beautiful, that they inspire awe, they are joyful, and so on. So they delight young people as they're playing them and as they're learning emotion regulation skills and other kinds of skills that promote human flourishing. So for example, I'll show you a video because it's the best way to kind of understand these kinds of games that we're designing. And what you'll see is that kids learn to put on this one-channel EEG headset, and their brain waves get automatically and in real time converted into light in the video game. The more anxious they get, the darker it is in the game. The more relaxed they are, the lighter their mind light grows in the game. So let's look at the video, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. So this is what we call a neurofeedback or biofeedback game. And so kids' own physiological regulation gets fed right into the game. And usually in therapy or these kinds of conventional programs in schools where we're trying to teach kids how to regulate their hard emotions like anxiety or sadness or anger, they are usually told in some kind of didactic way how to do that. In this game, they're actually kind of combined with the technology, and they're learning as they're being incentivized to win in the game. And they're just delighted. And we've found over 4 randomized control trials, studies that are the gold standard in the field, that this game, Mindlight, and others like it are as effective, and in some cases more effective, than cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the gold standard when it comes to teaching kids how to regulate their anxiety. And so we're really excited about this kind of mashup of technology and sort of incentivized emotion engagement from young people and what we can do with that at scale.
And Isabela, I wonder if you could say something about what motivated you to do this. It could be sort of considered a bit of a risky venture. I wondered whether it was because you felt that there were shortcomings in what was made available already, in this on these platforms for children, or whether you saw that actually we are failing to use this resource, in the way that it has the potential for, or maybe a bit of both of those. What was it that drove you?
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed both of them, plus the fact that I had 2 7-year-old kids, twin boys who loved gaming and who I just wanted to be a part of their world a little bit more. So I sat down next to them for hours and hours and tried to understand the kinds of things that were delighting them and engaging them and motivating them, not just to shoot things, but to socialize, to learn to problem solve, to figure out how to get to more efficient ends in ways that were really creative. And so that was part of it. It really was about just connecting with young kids and their playgrounds right about now and for the last 10 or 20 years. And the other part is that, these games are just, they're so diverse and they're incredibly social at their core. And being able to take those mechanics that help us connect and help us flourish and delight us, to be able to take those kinds of technologies and basically put them for good, not evil uses, seemed like really low-hanging fruit. And it has been. It's been just a delight working with designers and engineers to do this kind of work.
So I guess now when people say, human flourishing. Is there an app for that? You can say, well, yes, here we go. And Maria, if I can come to you, I think you could probably say the same as well. You've described your venture, 29K, as an open source, scalable solution for inner development and civic leadership. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means, what that entails?
Yes, absolutely, Philip. 29K, the app is from the 29K Foundation, and we were founded very much on the premise that individuals and societies need to build at scale psychological resources to cope with everyday life, flourish, and contribute towards a better future for all and planet. And so we have built, as you correctly mentioned, a non-profit and open source platform to make that possible. So our intention is to ultimately democratize access to evidence-based tools in order to train our inner capacities and nurture civic leadership, where we ultimately combine access to these tools with a peer-to-peer support network or framework rather, and so allowing users to also connect and get further support from each other that both builds an aspect of common humanity and widens and deepens their practice and ultimately the impact of using the interventions. And I think, why is it nonprofit and open source? It's very much ensuring, whilst the interventions themselves are very much rooted in science, making it nonprofit and providing free access to the end user means that we remove any competing motivations other than supporting the individual when it comes to the technological development that's built into the platform. And it ultimately allows us to develop a solution that optimizes for a societal value metric versus a for-profit value metric. And this means that we're ultimately able to build a robust platform that it can also further the research behind human development and contribute to improving interventions over time and contributing to the science behind them through the access to the data and insights that technology enables. But very much taking a Wikipedia approach to building a tech solution rather than creating another Facebook. So where the individual is ultimately still, at the end of the day, free to choose when to use it rather than trying to sell something or hijack their attention. And when it comes to the science behind the platform, from the outset, we identified sort of three core elements, similar to what Isabela also mentioned when it comes to creating an effective platform that is impactful when it comes to shaping people's behavior and values. And that is ensuring that everything, all the tools that are there are evidence-based and scientifically proven and have a sort of robust theoretical foundation, but also that we put things into a lovable format to nurture practice over time, because that is key for integration and behavioral change. And then that sort of safe container that provides human connection via peer-to-peer support, where users can connect also with each other via chat and audio and group video sharings. That really, it both keeps the practice over time, but it's also that real-time connection with others that mean that you're not, the user is ultimately not getting stuck, as you say, in themselves, but also that connection with others and the world around them. That is obviously for us an assumption that is a key part of human flourishing if it's going to contribute to us together building a better future for all.
One thing I wanted to follow up on what you just said, Maria, is I think we're probably sort of used to the idea now that many of these new technologies, I mean, even dare I say Twitter and Google, can be sources of information and data about human activity, human behavior. I wondered, you seem to imply that maybe the platform that you're developing doesn't just draw on what is known scientifically about human flourishing, but actually can create data and understanding and insight into that aspect itself. Is that the case? Are you finding out things about human flourishing from the way people use these resources?
I mean, we ultimately, of course, we see data and insights, for example, of even how long people stay on to practice with the tools, and where there are drop-offs, in order to optimize for them, to nudge them ultimately to continue through their own choice to come back and practice in order to have a sort of deeper impact on their behaviors. At the same time, it's very important that it is an open source project, because this not only allows, this is very critical when it comes to providing transparency, and to be able to have others review how we monitor and use data, and make it possible to also review our content and quality assure the sources of that content. So in that sense, we are always backed up by our own structure, so that you can only really apply technology in a way that is for the betterment for all in that sense. And that's why also having, the non-profit aspect ensures that we are not sort of in any way impacted by any commercial interest that, as you say, then leads more into the ominous and controlling side that technology can also unfortunately lead to.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Srinija, if I could come to you now, I'd like to also hear something about the project that you're engaged in. And, as a former musician of sorts, I just love the idea of a music venture that is looking to see how how something like music can be driven by artistic values rather than commercial values. So could you tell us something about what that entails?
Sure. So I was lucky to experience the early internet and web days in the 1990s and before, when Yahoo was just being born. And this is before market forces rushed in. So it was actually, for those of us who were around, a rather communitarian post-hippie culture. Some might remember the days of BBSs and The Well and Stuart Brand's whole Earth catalog. So those seeds are there, and we could revive this ethos. It's easy to forget those fleeting early days, because in the main, we've since seen technology on capitalism, on modern Western capitalism. We haven't seen in the main technology on the kind of humanism that Isabela and Maria are uplifting now. And so I think first what we need is this kind of conversation to spark imagination, right? What do we want from technology? And let's focus our energy there, because what we've done so far is such a tiny fraction of what we could be doing. And when I think about imagination, the arts, to me, are maybe our most potent technologies that humans have come up with to show us our shared humanity, to see our seeing, right? To sort of make visible the frame we're operating in, and interrogate it, to explore and express our collective imagination. I think the arts are phenomenal for this. And maybe Pulitzer Prize winning jazz master Henry Threadgill says it best. He says, art makes us behave better. I just love that. So Loove, which I've co-founded with my friend Josh Roseman, who's a lifelong composer, musician, band leader, producer, it's about creating the conditions to facilitate movements in the arts. One way, it's an ambitious, multifaceted endeavor, but I talk about, like, what would farm to table music be? Because the farm to table narrative gave me, just in the course of my lifetime, a way bigger story about a whole food system that I am a part of. And it changed my beliefs and behaviors as a result. So just as the farm to the table demonstrates a whole ecosystem for food, in creative culture, in music, we have production, we have presentation, we have distribution. That's sort of the legs of our stool, our end to end. And in the 20th century, production was a function of the big studios. Presentation was a function of, like, venues and concert halls. Distribution was a function of labels. Now, in the 21st century, a digital era, how can we reimagine these tools, borrow from what worked before, but improve on what we can do now? So Loove addresses each of these legs. We have a studio for production. That's itself a venue for presentation, for performances, live and virtual. And then importantly, we're developing a set of tools for distribution. Like, what would a label be now that promotes a transparent profit sharing model? It helps people understand this way bigger story where each of us, audiences, artists, producers, we each and all have a role to play. And when we play that role and invest, then we create a generative math, not the sort of zero-sum scarcity-based competition that we might see in how the music industry has intersected with technology and commerce so far.
And I guess the question that arises for me in doing that is whether there is, one sometimes hears a worry that as something gets democratized, I mean, this may be happening with, for example, in sort of literature and book sales, that you get what scientists would call a regression to the mean. You get there's a kind of normalization, a normative model that arises from that. How can you ensure that a model like that actually promotes diversity of output rather than conformity?
Yeah, I think that's really critical. And it's why, and I first started, we create the conditions to facilitate movements in the arts. And we really think about addressing this layer of conditions, not outcomes. I don't want to be prescriptive and didactic about how it should end up and what should come out, because I want to allow for the proliferation, the diversity, the creativity, the spontaneity, the discovery, all of the serendipity that the human creative imagination can have at our best, but to really attend to what creates the conditions for thriving creative culture, what creates the conditions for us to behave more interdependently and collaboratively in this generative math instead of competitively in a scarcity sum mentality, what creates those conditions, and then to create the tools based around, leaning on, putting the thumb on the scale towards those conditions. So it has to do a lot with at what level is our intention being applied? And that it would, I completely think, be a bad idea. In fact, what we see often in capitalism is the result of people wanting to control outcomes, wanting to say sort of, let me just create a blinder path where you have a narrow view of your role and you can kind of, I can blindly separate you from your wallet and you didn't even feel it happening. This is about actually expanding our aperture, widening our aperture, seeing ourselves in a bigger whole to understand how that interaction occurs, what happens, and to improvise with those dynamics as they're happening.
Thanks. I mean, I wonder whether this is also a question for Maria and Isabela, which is sort of really about how one is able to ensure that if you make something open source, if you make something democratized, how you ensure that that remains in the hands of the users. There is always, as we've always seen, there is this constant, pressure for commercialization, for companies to step in, for the profit motives to step in. How do you prevent that from happening in ventures like yours?
I can go if you like. Well, so one of the things that we're doing is for the next 5 years, we've got this great funding to be able to do exactly that, which is to take the 10 years of experience that we have in developing games by combining design and art with the science and taking the methods, the mindset practices, the techniques, and those tools out into the world and trying to give it out for free in terms of the knowledge IP and so on. So people can do it on their own. And we're not actually against capitalism or making money. There's lots of indie game developers, for example, who need to pay their rent, who need to do their creative work and get some compensation for that. But if they get the tools, if they understand how science works and what are some of the kernels that they can put into their own games or apps that will authentically have a chance to help flourishing, especially in young people is what we're focusing on. And also really importantly, bringing stakeholders, which by that we mean the actual teens and young adults, the young people at the table early on, to have them be a part of the design process and also to have them start their own businesses with these kinds of tools in hand. And it's again, this, I love what Srinija talked about in terms of like the diversification and the democratization of the creative process. And also giving them the tools by which they can use and how to evaluate scientifically what they're doing and whether their claims around scientifically based outcomes can be backed up by really simple, low-hanging fruit types of scientific studies on this. And so that's what we're trying to do now in our next phase, is instead of us doing all of the game development, app development in our in-house, we want to be able to bring that out to anyone else who's doing it, both in industry and in academia, and try to have that make a bigger impact and elevate all of our capacities.
Maria, if I could come to you, you've talked about the need, well, the efforts you're making to democratize support for mental health and inner development, and about what needs to change at the broader societal level to enable that. And you've also pointed out that we really seem to be at the moment at a point of crisis in mental health, in life satisfaction, particularly amongst young people. Now, I don't imagine that anyone thinks that can be simply fixed by an app, but I think you see the key to be finding ways, including technological ways, of helping people to reestablish human communication. You've talked about that's really the important issue, and I know this might be a hard question, but where do you think technologies can take us in addressing such problems when at root they may be complex social and economic problems, or even political problems?
I mean, I believe ultimately it's a combination of efforts, where technology is one piece of the puzzle. And I think if I start, first of all, as you say, at the societal level, then ultimately I think we can safely sort of stake that we have not yet normalized, certainly in the Western world, working on your mental health and inner capacities, and nor have we put at the forefront across society, the levels of society, different levels of society, the link between sort of human flourishing or inner development and sustainable development. So first of all, in combination with technologies, it's also about addressing that norms need to change, and change perspectives, as you also say, Philip, at the political, policy level, institutional and organizational, as well as individual. And so if we take certainly policy, institutional and organizational first there, in parallel to creating and launching the 29K, open source nonprofit app, and we've also initiated, together with the new division and the Oak Island Foundation, the Inner Development Goals Initiative. And that's very much focusing on furthering the movement of inner development as a way to accelerate progress towards sustainable development by raising awareness and inspiring collective action amongst key actors within academia and nations, private and civil organizations, in a bid to ultimately normalize the importance of an inner development for oneself and for others and the planet in a whole. And so the Inner Development Goals framework is the fruit of that endeavor, where we have started to map out the capabilities, qualities, and transformative skills that are needed to achieve sustainable development. And this is now gaining global momentum with over 100 IDG country hubs. Costa Rica has formally signed up as the first country to adopt the Inner Development Goals to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is sort of creating this sort of rather a narrative of hope and a concrete way to address the sort of knowing doing gap that we are living in, to inspire collective action and ultimately shift to practice and building communities of practice when it comes to inner development and human flourishing. And then that's where 29K is ultimately endeavoring not only ourselves to scale out to millions, but to inspire and serve as an example of how to apply then technology for good in using its possibilities, as you, Srinija, also mentioned, in terms of what do we want technology to be used for? How can we sort of use our imaginations and that narrative of hope to build a better future and ultimately not ignore technology's critical role to play there. And I think within that then, when it comes to actually being intentional in developing technologies for human flourishing, and in order to sort of realize that full positive potential, it is also, as you say, Philip, how do you work around the open source risk and commercial interest push? It is still that we are making sure to keep the user in focus and not as the end product, like we see in the large social networks of today, but rather that technology is then merely the interface to get the learnings out at scale to humanity and democratize access for all, and also benefit from that, the close to zero marginal cost that technology enables, so that we really are ensuring that irrespective of socioeconomic background or cultural settings, we are ensuring also relevant support for nurturing human flourishing within every individual globally.
Fantastic. We're running out of time. I want to just try and squeeze this in, but perhaps with just a one-sentence answer from each of you, if you have one. I'm really, technology changes so rapidly, almost, probably as fast as you can develop apps for it. So I just wondered whether each of you sees something coming on the horizon technologically that is going to transform again the possibilities that we have.
Well, I'll just start and say I don't have that kind of crystal ball. I never have. And I what I like is creating the possibilities for people to find their highest creativity. So technology is just a tool that amplifies and accelerates the consciousness wielding it. That's like what we mean when we say the word. Technology amplifies and accelerates the consciousness wielding it. So let's, as Isabela said, focus on inner development. Let's attend to the quality of our consciousness, and then we will see the fruits of different input for a completely different accelerated amplified output.
I'll add that, it's not the technology, just exactly along the same lines. I think young people right now are very different than I was in Gen X and even millennials, and they feel empowered to use even these huge global platforms in small digital campfire ways where they're finding like-minded people that share their values. And in those contexts, they are using the technologies that are already out there in really unique, empowering individual ways that I think we are about to see some really inspiring examples from, and we don't even have to develop it for them. They'll do it for us.
Thank you so much. Those are fantastic answers. I think I'm going to have to wrap it up here. We've run out of time, but thank you all so much, Isabela, Maria, and Srinija. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll leave it there.